welcome back today for another video. My name is Aika and my channel is dedicated to anyone interested in psychology and mental health, and this is basically a part of a series of videos that I've been making on psychology careers in the UK. And today I'm going to be looking at one of the most requested videos in my channel, which is my own journey into clinical psychology. Just before I go into the video, I just wanted to say that everyone's journey into clinical psychology is drastically different, so please don't take my journey as like, I don't know, the standard or whatever, because it's by far probably not, and there is no gold standard way of getting onto the doctorate. So let's start at the beginning. For some context, I'm Hong Kong Chinese. I went to an international school in Hong Kong. My family doesn't have any background in psychology. My dad's a professor in chemical engineering and my mom works kind of on the administrative side of a Japanese company. When I was in school, I started my GCSEs and I chose psychology for my GCSEs. We had a really amazing teacher. She was very encouraging, but at the time I was also really interested in visual arts actually. You know, a lot of people think that, for the DClinPsy, you're like destined to become a clinical psychologist or like destined to love psychology. Actually, for a lot of people, that's not the truth. That wasn't the truth for me either. I actually loved art a lot more than psychology for a long time during high school. For my GCSEs, I got all A stars and A's, barring a B in economics. The next stage is IB. So for those who are unfamiliar with what IB is, it's basically International Baccalaureate. So our high school used to be fully A levels, but then we changed to International Baccalaureate because I think the school felt that it was more well-rounded, it's more competitive. IB was very intense, but actually it was the perfect pre-university kind of process to go through because it was very intense, very holistic. And then came choosing a degree for university. So I was still entertaining between art and psychology. So I asked my parents, and my parents are Asian, very Asian. So they basically said, choose art as a hobby, don't make it your career. Just study psychology for your undergraduate degree. And I just followed the path of least resistance. I was like, yeah, fair, it makes sense. So I chose psychology. I chose Warwick, Edinburgh, UCL and Royal Holloway. And I had one university left to choose, but I didn't really know what I wanted. My parents, being, very Asian and very pro Oxbridge, they're like, they're like sitting on the dinner table and they're like, oh, I can like, not that we use knife and fork, okay, like chopsticks. Oh, like Aika, why don't you try, Oxford or Cambridge? And honestly, I was just like, you've got to be kidding me, because I was definitely not the smartest one in the year by far. Like I wasn't even thinking about Oxbridge, like not at all. I was just like, who do you think I am? Like, I'm definitely not good enough for this. I was so angry. 3 days before the actual deadline, my dad was still trying to convince me, and my mom was like, oh, it's a lottery, like you won't win if you don't put it in, which I still remember today. But my dad basically set up a dinner with his good friend and colleague who's a professor who went to Cambridge for her PhD in like molecular sciences or something crazy like that, but she's now a professor in Hong Kong. She sat me down, she's just like, go for it, I'll support you, just like try it, like why not? And I was just like, fine, like I'll do it. So I had 3 days for the Oxbridge deadline, and at that point I had no idea what Oxbridge was. I didn't know that they had a collegiate system, meaning that you apply to a college in Cambridge, so like King's or John's or whatever, rather than the university itself. I thought it was just like a massive campus. So when I came to applying for Cambridge, the UCAS drop-down box said choose your college, and I remember so well, I sat next to, I think, the deputy head girl or something, and I asked her, hey, do you have to choose a college? And she looked at me in the most judgmental way, because these people have been like going to Oxbridge seminars and getting Oxbridge tutoring for like, I don't know, like 2 years or at least like few months and stuff, and I had no clue. So the judgmental like look from her face, I was just like, okay, cool, like I'm just gonna do it myself now. I then got an interview. The interview I also didn't want to go because I was like, dude, they're gonna notice how stupid I am anyways. But I prepared for it. My teacher gave me some mock interviews, which was way harder than the actual interview. Yeah, flew over after my dad convinced me that it'll be a nice like trip, like road trip anyways. So my first time going to England basically was in 2013 in December. And by January I got accepted. So in 2014 I graduated from high school. I was 17 and I packed my bags and went to Cambridge. And that was my second time ever stepping into the UK. So 3 years of undergrad, extremely intense. First year I did 2 compulsory modules on research methods and introduction to psychology. And then 2 modules were chosen, not voluntary, but like chosen ones. One I did on social anthropology and the other one on biological anthropology. I sucked at both of them, honestly. It was just like not my thing. And then in the second year, I did experimental psychology, which I really enjoyed, neurobiology, which is really bloody hard, but I ended up enjoying. And then I think 2 compulsory papers again, I think. And then in my third year, I did cognitive and behavioral neuroscience, developmental psychopathology, the family, and a mandatory research paper. So when did I decide to go onto the clinical psychology route? In the summer of second year of Cambridge, I was thinking about career routes. Loads of people from Cambridge go into management consultancy straight out of university. So obviously I was considering that as well. I was also thinking about maybe marketing. I wanted to be a hotel manager with my psychology degree in my first year, which is really bizarre to think about. Yeah, I went to an interview for PwC for a management consultancy. I absolutely hated it. It was literally like a case study on like how to sell like palm oil or some thing, and I was just like, do I want to do this like for my whole life? So that was the best like instinctive decision that I made, that this is not the right area for me. I don't know what area was right for me, but definitely not like how to advertise palm oil in a better way or something. I literally just chose clinical psychology because I'm like, clinical psychology is probably the most prestigious one, so why not do that and then, you know, decide later. It came out of a place not from like wanting to help people, to be honest, from the beginning. It was more like, I'm spending so much time studying this fascinating subject on, you know, human mind and behavior and emotions. I don't want to come out of university not using these skills. So what can I do? Obviously, the next thing is to, you know, become a psychologist or to do a PhD. So that's something that I also considered as well. Finally, I graduate in 2017. With a double first class honours from King's College, Cambridge. I really wanted to move to London, so I applied for my master's in clinical mental health sciences at UCL a few months before I graduated, and I got in. So I spent a few months in between my bachelor's and my master's travelling, and then I settled in London. Honestly, looking back, I don't think I should have done the master's so soon because I was so burnt out from Cambridge and so saturated. Like, I knew how to hack exams by that point. Doing a master's on top of that was just like 1 year in, 1 year out in terms of information. It wasn't grounded in a clinical context, so I never had any proper clinical experience by that point. So all the information was just still information for me. I didn't gain as much as I could have if I did my master's later on. However, it was still good. Like, I made the most out of it. On the side, I also worked in a psychosis service, so early intervention in psychosis service. It's the main reason I actually chose the master course because it provided a placement, and I basically worked in that psychosis service for like a full year, but 1 day a week, and that was really fascinating. They didn't really know what to do with me. It was kind of awkward, but I just decided to put myself out there and be really, really engaged and literally just like bother everyone. Most of them were social workers, so I just basically sat in their cars and they drove to people's houses to do home visits, and I got to experience firsthand the bubble that I was in my life. Like I was in a very protective, very privileged bubble, and here was the first time I saw how other people, in the same society live. It was a grounding experience, and also a very life-changing experience, I think, like going to those home visits to really understand the struggles that, the same people born on earth, some people get to live like, nice lives and other people like don't, like just by chance really. So during my master's degree I worked with a professor and also her PhD student. We worked on a paper on mental health policy, so looking at the accuracy and accessibility of evidence and mental health policy documents. So at that point I found mental health policy really fascinating, but spent the whole next year on editing it for publication, loads of frustration, but that's a different video that I can make around how to or my experience publishing a paper. And then I graduated from my master's, really happy. I had around 3 to 4 months in the summer to really decide what I wanted to do. Obviously, knowing the doctorate course, everyone wants to be an assistant psychologist. I got quite a few interviews but never got through, got rejected like more than 20 times maybe. Started looking at support work and started looking at other options as well, like working in a mental health charity. I was really, really stuck. It was such a difficult time. Also looked at research assistant job. Again, I kept getting interviews but kept failing at the interview stage. One person in King's, a professor there, saw some potential in me to be a researcher, so she invited me to do a PhD instead, and I genuinely was so tempted to go on to that PhD. So I was like talking and kind of designing a project already, and like that kind of like PhD kind of mindset. I was quite like scared about it. I don't think I was definitely ready for that. So it kind of just tailed off naturally because I just wasn't motivated to actually work as a PhD student at King's. So come like August or something, I'm literally at my last straw of like patience and confidence. I go to an assistant psychologist interview in a private hospital, and I got the job. So I was like over the moon. So in October 2018, I started working in an inpatient psychiatric hospital for women in East London. It was the most intense year ever. It wasn't a 1-year contract, but it was just so intense that after a year, I felt that I need to move on. I will make a different video on my experience working in an inpatient psychiatric hospital, but I basically worked in between a psychiatric intensive care unit and a low secure forensic PD, so personality disorder ward. And I learned so much, honestly, even though it was non-NHS, simply because actually I had way more responsibility than I should have as an AP. There wasn't a lot of protection on it. So I worked for a year and decided that my knowledge was saturating at that point and there wasn't really anything new, and things became a little bit repetitive. And I knew that given, my age and also my like stage of career, I really should be trying to move on. So I did quite a few interviews in other AP jobs, and again, like it was just bloody difficult. So I decided, hey, like why not try PWP? And at that time, my new supervisor also was a PWP, but she was then a clinical psychologist. So I was like, hey, like it's an option. So I interviewed for a PWP post and I got it, and I started training in October 2019. The PWP course itself was really interesting, much more structured than working as an AP, and I definitely got a lot of clinical skills from it. You can watch my other video on PWP if you're interested in that. During my first year as an assistant psychologist, I didn't think about the doctorate at all because I just simply knew that I didn't have enough experience to answer any questions or write any kind of personal statement. So I didn't think about anything like that. But by the time I started my PWP course, I already knew that I would at least try and get familiar with the process. And I literally made the worst mistake ever. Guys, don't follow me to do this. I literally wrote the application, read it like twice, didn't send it to anyone. So I knew quite a few clinical psychologists out there, didn't send it to anyone, and I just sent it away. So when I had dinner with my old clinical psychologist, so the old head of psychology and also my ex supervisor, they were both like flabbergasted. They're like, Aika, like, no, like you're such a promising candidate, but that's just the wrong way, especially for your first one. And I was like, shit, man, like, oh, like I really screwed up here. I got rejected from 3 universities, so UCL, King's and Royal Holloway. But then I got an interview for Oxford, which was like, thank God. For Oxford this year, there were around 700 applicants or 800, something like that. So they choose 75 people to interview. But at that point, coronavirus hit and I had my interview online. The interview itself went pretty good. I stumbled on quite a few questions really badly, but I felt that some of the questions I really did very well on. So I got 3rd reserve for Oxford on my first try of applying to the doctorate. They give 25 people accepted offer, and then, well, like a proper offer, and then 25 people they put on reserve. So people who are good enough to be accepted, but like they're just not enough space. And then 25 people they reject. So I was like 3rd in the reserve list, so I was quite far on top. For some reason, like a reserve was right for me. It felt like my abilities did match with being a reserve, if that makes sense. I felt like if I got a straight offer, I would have massive imposter syndrome. So actually getting on reserve list was like the best outcome, actually, because it felt like it matched my abilities. It was a very nerve-wracking 3 weeks. The reserve list kept shifting, while like shift 1 every maybe week or so, or 2 weeks. After 3 weeks, I got a call from one of the clinical psychologists, and I then got accepted by Oxford University for their doctorate program for clinical psychology, which I was like, I screamed, I was so happy, but it was like lockdown, so there was no one else that I could celebrate with. I was there with my Aperol spritz, and I was just like, being so happy, and it was such a surreal experience. That was May 2020. Right now, I'm still a trainee psychological wellbeing practitioner, so I'm still working full-time. This is where I am at now. I have not started my degree to qualify as a clinical psychologist yet. So it starts on September 28th, and now it's around June or something. So I'm still working. I think I'm going to take some time off before the course starts. If you want to follow my journey, because obviously it continues from here for another 3 years, please subscribe, support my Instagram. I post there regularly about my reflections and my lessons in psychology and in mental health. Comment down below, like my video, share my videos. Stay tuned for my next video, which will be on my experience working in an inpatient psychiatric hospital in the UK. So see you next time. Bye.